The last thing I signed before getting fired wasn't a resignation letter. It was the only certification keeping a $12.5 million empire from collapsing overnight. They thought they'd purged me like an extra line item on a payroll report. Too bad. They forgot my name was the only thing legally authorizing every project they'd been bragging about to investors. Want to know how a company implodes because of one signature? Fine. Stay until the end. I promise I won't waste your time. My name is Emily Davenport, and for 7 years, I was the invisible backbone of Everstead Environmental Solutions. You've probably never heard of us, which is exactly how they liked it. We were the kind of mid-tier environmental consulting firm that corporate America hired to make their conscience feel clean while they bulldozed wetlands and built parking lots over protected habitats. My official title was Compliance Certifying Officer, which sounds important until you realize my office was a converted storage closet next to the archive room, where the constant whir of the copy machine provided the soundtrack to my professional existence. I wasn't the person they put on the company website. My face never graced the annual reports or the LinkedIn posts about our amazing team. I was the ghost in the machine, the name at the bottom of every environmental impact assessment, every permit application, every certification that allowed Everstead to operate across 5 states. My signature was on thousands of documents, but my presence in the office was barely acknowledged. The executives would walk past my desk without a glance, their eyes already focused on whatever PowerPoint presentation awaited them in the glass-walled conference rooms I was never invited to enter. The thing about being invisible is that people assume you're also deaf and blind. They conduct their conversations right outside your door, forgetting you exist. That's how I learned about the new restructuring plan 3 months before it was announced. Carter Whitfield, our newly appointed CEO, was standing 6 feet from my desk, telling the CFO about his vision for a leaner, more dynamic organization. His voice carried that particular brand of corporate enthusiasm that only comes from people who've never actually done the work they're reorganizing. Carter was 37. With the kind of aggressively styled hair that suggested he spent more on grooming products than I made in a month. He'd come from the startup consulting world, where success was measured in pitch decks and disruption rather than actual compliance with federal regulations. He wore tailored suits that probably cost more than my car and had a habit of punctuating his sentences with meaningless phrases like synergistic efficiency and scalable solutions. I remember the first all-hands meeting he called. The entire company gathered in the main conference room, which they'd decorated with motivational posters featuring soaring eagles and mountain peaks. Carter stood at the front with a clicker in his hand, advancing through slides filled with graphs and bullet points about optimizing our human capital and eliminating redundancies. I sat in the back row, taking notes not about his presentation, but about the worried glances employees were exchanging. Everyone knew what eliminating redundancies meant in corporate speak. The axe started falling 2 weeks later. First, it was the junior analysts, kids fresh out of college who'd been promised career growth and mentorship. Then the administrative staff, people who'd been with the company for decades and knew where every file was stored and every client preference documented. Each termination was handled with the same clinical efficiency. A morning email requesting a meeting with HR, a 15-minute conversation about strategic realignment, and a cardboard box for personal belongings. I watched it all from my corner office. If you could call a repurposed closet an office. My colleagues would stop by my desk after their termination meetings, some crying, others in shock. I'd offer them tissues from the box I kept in my drawer and listen to their stories about mortgages and medical bills and kids in college. But I also noticed something else during those conversations. They all mentioned how Carter had never bothered to understand what they actually did. He'd made his decisions based on salary figures and organizational charts, not on the actual work that kept Everstead running. That's when I started my own documentation project. Every evening, after the office emptied and the only sounds were the humming of computers in sleep mode and the occasional ping of an after-hours email, I'd review our active projects. I created spreadsheets linking every certification to specific contracts, every permit to its renewal date, every license to the revenue streams it enabled. It wasn't paranoia that drove me. It was pattern recognition. I'd been in this business long enough to know that when executives start talking about efficiency without understanding operations, they inevitably cut the very people holding everything together. My prediction proved accurate on a Thursday morning in March. The email arrived at 9:47 a.m. Its subject line deliberately vague. Meeting request, 11 a.m. I knew what it meant before I even opened it. The sender was Jennifer from HR, a woman who'd perfected the art of delivering bad news with a sympathetic smile. The meeting location was Conference Room B, the small one they used for performance reviews and, apparently, terminations. I spent the next hour finishing up a certification renewal for our biggest client's water treatment facility in Ohio. It seemed important to complete it, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. Maybe it was professional pride, maybe it was habit, or maybe some part of me already knew how this story would end. At 11 a.m. sharp, I walked into Conference Room B with my notepad and pen. Tools I wouldn't need but brought anyway out of professional habit. Jennifer was there with her laptop open, and beside her sat Carter, scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference of someone about to ruin a person's livelihood between lunch meetings. "Emily, thanks for coming," Jennifer began, her voice pitched at that particular frequency of fake concern that HR professionals master in training. "We wanted to discuss some organizational changes that will be affecting your position." Carter finally looked up from his phone, offering me the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Emily, let me start by saying we appreciate everything you've done for Everstead. Your dedication to compliance has been adequate. However, as we move forward with our strategic vision for the company, we've identified areas where we can create efficiencies through automation and outsourcing." I sat quietly, letting him continue his rehearsed speech about market dynamics and competitive positioning. The words washed over me like white noise. I'd heard this same script delivered to dozens of my former colleagues. The only variation was in the euphemisms they chose to dress up the basic message. "You're fired because we think we can save money without you. Your role has become redundant." Carter continued, clearly warming to his theme. "We've partnered with a third-party compliance service that can handle our certification needs at a fraction of the cost. It's nothing personal, Emily. It's just business." That phrase, "it's just business," hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could have pointed out that the third-party service he'd contracted with didn't have licenses in 3 of the 5 states where we operated. I could have explained that our certifications were tied to individual compliance officers, not to companies. I could have warned him about the 60-day notification requirements for changing certifying authorities on active projects. But I didn't. Because Carter Whitfield had made it clear from his first day that he didn't value input from people like me. So I gave him exactly what he expected: silent acquiescence. "I understand," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "What are the terms?" Jennifer jumped in with practiced efficiency, sliding a separation agreement across the table. 2 weeks severance, continuation of health benefits for 30 days, and a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the terms of my departure. Standard corporate procedure for making problems disappear quietly. I read through it carefully. Not because I planned to negotiate, but because I wanted to note what it didn't say. There was no mention of transferring my certifications, no clause about transitioning my licensing authority, no provision for handling the 43 active projects that bore my signature. "Do you have any questions?" Jennifer asked after I'd finished reading. "Just one," I replied, looking directly at Carter. "Do you want me to finish the Ohio water treatment certification renewal? It's due today." Carter waved his hand dismissively. "Our new compliance partner will handle all ongoing projects. We've already given them access to our systems." I nodded and signed the separation agreement, taking care to use my personal pen rather than the company one. It was a small distinction, but in my profession, small distinctions mattered. Jennifer printed a copy for my records, and Carter was already checking his phone again before the printer had finished warming up. "We'll need your company property," Jennifer said apologetically. "Keycard, laptop, any files or documents." "Of course," I replied. I'll box up my office and have everything ready within the hour. Carter stood up, clearly eager to move on to his next meeting. Best of luck in your future endeavors, Emily. I'm sure someone with your specialized skills will land on their feet. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to spread on toast. I smiled, the kind of smile that would have worried him if he'd been paying attention. But Carter Whitfield had already dismissed me from his thoughts, just as he'd dismissed me from his company. He left the conference room without another word, leaving Jennifer to handle the awkward aftermath. Back in my office, I packed methodically. A small succulent plant that had somehow survived 7 years of fluorescent lighting. A coffee mug with "Certified to Outlast Idiots" printed on the side. A gift from a colleague who'd been laid off 6 months earlier. A handful of personal items that had accumulated in my desk drawers. Hand lotion, tea bags, a phone charger. Everything fit into a single cardboard box. A portable summary of 7 years of professional life. I left the company property neatly arranged on the desk. Laptop, key card, company credit card I'd used maybe twice in all my years there. The office supplies stayed in their drawers. The filing cabinets remained locked, their keys placed precisely in the center of the desk. Everything in perfect order, exactly as a compliance officer would leave it. The walk to my car felt longer than usual, probably because I was carrying a box and watching my former colleagues avoid eye contact. Word traveled fast in an office, and nobody wanted to be seen fraternizing with the newly departed. I understood. They had mortgages, too. I sat in my car for a moment, box in the passenger seat, engine running but going nowhere. The radio was playing some cheerful pop song about resilience and moving on. The kind of empty encouragement that sounds profound until you actually need it. I turned it off and drove home in silence, already thinking 3 moves ahead. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I worked. The first task was creating a comprehensive list of every active certification, permit, and license associated with my name. 43 projects across 5 states, representing approximately $12.5 million in active contracts. Each one required a certified compliance officer's oversight. Each one was legally bound to my license number, not to Everstead as a company. The second task was researching the notification requirements for each state's environmental regulatory board. This was where my years of meticulous study paid off. Most people in my position knew the regulations for their primary state of operation. I knew them all, because I'd made it my business to understand every nuance of interstate compliance. Delaware required 60 days' notice for a change in certifying authority. Pennsylvania mandated a formal transfer process that included client notification. Ohio wouldn't recognize a new compliance officer without a 6-month overlap period for complex projects. The third task was the most satisfying: registering my own company. Clear Edge Compliance Consulting came into existence at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night, formed through an online legal service while I ate leftover Chinese food and listened to rain against my apartment windows. The name was deliberate, clear edges, clean breaks, no ambiguity about where things stood. Over the next 3 days, I set up the infrastructure of a legitimate consulting firm, a business bank account, professional liability insurance, a simple website that stated facts without embellishment, a new email address that would soon become very familiar to certain regulatory boards. Everything above board. Everything perfectly legal. Everything Carter Whitfield should have considered before treating compliance like an afterthought. On Monday morning, while Carter was probably leading another meeting about synergistic opportunities, I began sending notifications to the relevant state boards. The letters were professionally written, following the exact format required by each jurisdiction. They informed the boards that Emily Davenport, license MM7832E, was no longer associated with Everstead Environmental Solutions, effective immediately. Any projects currently certified under my authority would need to be recertified by a new compliance officer meeting all state requirements. The beauty of bureaucracy is its indifference to corporate drama. The state boards didn't care about Carter's strategic vision or Everstead's cost-cutting measures. They cared about properly filed paperwork and valid certifications. Without those, projects stopped, permits expired, work ground to a halt. I knew it would take time for the consequences to manifest. Government agencies don't move quickly, but they move inevitably. So while I waited, I focused on building ClearEdge. I reached out to former colleagues who'd been casualties of earlier restructuring efforts. Many had found new positions, but some were struggling. I offered them contract work, project-based assignments that paid fairly and respected their expertise. One of those calls was to Daniel Rourke. He'd been Everstead's director of environmental programs until Carter decided the position was strategically redundant. Now he ran a boutique consulting firm in Portland, specializing in sustainable development projects. We'd always respected each other's work, and when I explained my situation, he laughed for a full minute. "You beautiful, devious genius," he said when he finally caught his breath. They fired their compliance officer without understanding compliance. How very Carter Whitfield. Daniel became my strategic advisor, teaching me the business development side of consulting while I handled the technical expertise. He introduced me to potential clients, helped me price my services competitively, and most importantly, kept me focused on building something better rather than just tearing something down. "Revenge is satisfying," he told me during one of our video calls. "But success is sustainable. Don't just burn bridges, build better ones." It was good advice, and I tried to follow it, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a surge of satisfaction when the first domino fell. It started with a phone call from Megan Chen, who'd been promoted to fill my position at a fraction of my salary. She was 26, fresh from her MBA program, and completely overwhelmed by the reality of environmental compliance. Carter had told her the job was mostly managing relationships and coordinating with vendors. He hadn't mentioned the thousands of pages of regulations, the state-specific requirements, or the personal liability that came with signing off on environmental assessments. "Emily, I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "But I'm getting these notices from the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency about invalid certifications, and I don't understand what they mean." I could have helped her, could have explained the notification process, the transition requirements, the steps she'd need to take to get properly licensed in Ohio. But Megan had made her choice when she accepted a position she wasn't qualified for at a salary that insulted the profession. So I gave her the only advice that mattered. "You should talk to Carter," I said pleasantly. "I'm sure he has a strategic vision for handling this." The calls started coming more frequently after that. Former clients confused about why their permits were being rejected. Contractors unable to proceed with work because certifications had been invalidated. State inspectors showing up at job sites to shut down operations that no longer had proper oversight. Each call followed the same pattern. Initial confusion, growing alarm. Then the gradual realization that Everstead had created a compliance vacuum that was sucking their profits into a regulatory black hole. Some tried to hire me directly, offering generous contracts to fix their problems. I politely declined, referring them to other qualified consultants who charged emergency rates for rush work. By the 6th week, the situation at Everstead had moved from crisis to catastrophe. I heard about it through the professional grapevine that exists in every industry, where former employees share gossip and schadenfreude in equal measure. Projects in Delaware had been shut down completely. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection had issued cease and desist orders for 3 major sites. Ohio was threatening fines that would dwarf whatever salary Carter thought he was saving. But the real blow came from the investors. Everstead had been positioning itself for acquisition by a larger firm, promising strong fundamentals and a robust project pipeline. Due diligence, however, revealed a company in regulatory freefall. 43 projects in various stages of non-compliance. Millions in potential fines. A reputation for reliability built over 2 decades crumbling in as many months. That's when I received an email from Richard Townsend, chairman of Everstead's board of directors. Richard was old school, the kind of executive who'd built his career on handshake deals and personal relationships. He'd been golfing in Scotland when Carter implemented his restructuring plan, trusting his new CEO to handle operational details. The email was brief and to the point. Ms. Davenport, I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss the current situation. Please contact my assistant to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. RT. I waited 2 days before responding, not out of spite, but because ClearEdge had actual clients to serve. When I did meet with Richard, it was on my terms, in a neutral location. A coffee shop downtown where the ambient noise would prevent any recording of our conversation. Richard looked older than I remembered, stress adding lines to his already weathered face. He ordered black coffee and got straight to the point. How bad is it? He asked. That depends, I replied, stirring honey into my tea. How much did Carter tell you about compliance requirements before he terminated my position? Richard's laugh was bitter. He said he'd found a more cost-effective solution. Said compliance was mostly paperwork that could be outsourced. Compliance is paperwork. I agreed. Legal paperwork, binding paperwork, the kind that comes with personal liability for board members when it's not handled properly. I watched the color drain from his face as the implications sank in. Corporate boards could be held responsible for regulatory violations, especially when they resulted from negligent oversight. Every project that operated without proper certification was a potential lawsuit waiting to happen. What do you want? He asked finally. Nothing, I said, and meant it. I have my own company now, my own clients, my own future. What happens to Everstead is no longer my concern. Carter told the board you were redundant, Richard said, almost to himself. Said your role could be automated. Carter says a lot of things, I observed. How many of them have proven accurate? We sat in silence for a moment, watching office workers hurry past the window, everyone rushing to meetings where they'd use words like synergy and optimization, without understanding what really kept their companies running. Would you consider coming back? Richard asked eventually. Name your terms, salary, title, reporting structure, whatever you want. It was gratifying to be asked, to have the power to name my price after being dismissed like an unwanted furniture. But going back would have been a step backward, a return to invisibility in exchange for a paycheck. No, I said simply. I've moved on. But I can recommend several qualified consultants who might be able to help you transition your existing projects into compliance. They'll be expensive, emergency rates always are, but they're competent. Richard nodded slowly, understanding that this was the best offer he'd get. We finished our coffee in civilized silence, two professionals acknowledging the end of an era without unnecessary drama. I heard later that the board meeting following our conversation was less civilized. Carter Whitfield was escorted from the building by security, his strategic vision for Everstead's future ending with a cardboard box and a walk to the parking lot. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who'd suffered through his efficiency initiatives. Everstead survived. Barely. They hired a team of consultants at premium rates to untangle the compliance mess. They paid fines that wiped out 2 years of projected profits. They lost 3 major clients who couldn't afford the delays and uncertainty. The company that had once employed over 200 people limped along with half that number. A cautionary tale about the difference between cost and value. But I wasn't watching from the sidelines. ClearEdge grew steadily, built on a foundation of expertise and respect for the unglamorous work that keeps businesses legal. Former Everstead employees found their way to my door. And when possible, I hired them. Not out of charity, but because they understood what Carter Whitfield never had. That the people doing the quiet, careful work are the ones who matter most. Daniel and I formed a strategic partnership, combining our expertise to serve clients who valued compliance as more than just a cost center. We didn't promise synergistic solutions or disruptive innovation. We promised competence, reliability, and the peace of mind that comes from knowing your certifications won't vanish because someone decided to optimize their human capital. The success felt different from revenge, cleaner, more sustainable. I'd built something instead of just watching something burn. Though I'll admit, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that everything burned because of a signature they'd dismissed as redundant. My office now has windows. Real ones. looking out over the city where I've built my professional life. The coffee mug still says, certified to outlast idiots. But now it sits on a desk I chose, in a company I built, surrounded by people who understand that invisible doesn't mean unimportant. Sometimes I think about that last day at Everstead, signing papers in conference room B while Carter checked his phone and planned his next disruption. He thought he was eliminating redundancy, streamlining operations, creating efficiency. He never understood that some things can't be optimized away. Some roles can't be automated. Some signatures carry more weight than others. The last certification I signed for Everstead was for that water treatment facility in Ohio. I completed it even though I knew I'd be gone within the hour, because that's what professionals do. They finish the work, maintain the standards, uphold the obligations that others might not even know exist. Carter thought that kind of dedication was replaceable, a line item to be managed and minimized. He learned otherwise. They all did. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through the quiet implosion that comes from removing the foundation while focusing on the facade. I didn't destroy Everstead, I simply stopped holding it together. The rest was just gravity, paperwork, and the inevitable consequences of treating expertise like an expense. The business journals wrote articles about Everstead's fall, analyzing market conditions and strategic missteps. None of them mentioned the compliance officer who'd worked in a converted closet for 7 years. That was fine. I'd had enough of being invisible. Now I had a company with my name on the door, clients who valued my expertise, and the satisfaction of building something that couldn't be destroyed by a consultant with a PowerPoint and a contempt for the people who do the real work. Success, as Daniel had told me, is sustainable. It's also the best revenge for those who thought you didn't matter. They can't ignore you when your absence costs them $12.5 million. They can't dismiss you when your signature is the difference between operation and obliteration. They can't forget you when every regulatory notice reminds them of what they threw away. I still keep that separation agreement in my files, filed properly like everything else in my professional life. Sometimes I look at it and remember sitting in conference room B, listening to Carter explain why I was redundant. It serves as a reminder of how wrong smart people can be when they mistake quiet competence for insignificance. The succulent from my old office thrives on my new windowsill, finally getting the natural light it always deserved. Like me, it turned out to be more resilient than anyone expected. Like me, it flourished once removed from an environment that never valued what it contributed. That's the thing about being essential. You don't always know it until you're gone. Carter Whitfield thought he was running a lean, efficient organization. He ended up learning that some things shouldn't be cut, some people shouldn't be dismissed, and some signatures are worth more than the paper they're written on. The Ohio water treatment facility still operates under the certification I signed on my last day at Everstead. Every time I drive past it, I think about that moment of professional pride that made me complete the work even as I was being shown the door. It stands as a monument to the principle Carter never understood, that true professionals don't need recognition to do their jobs, but companies need professionals to survive. I don't harbor anger toward Everstead or even Carter Whitfield. Anger takes energy better spent on building something worthwhile. They made a business decision based on a fundamental misunderstanding of their business. They paid the price in fines, failures, and a reputation that may never fully recover. I paid no price at all. I simply withdrew my contribution and watched natural consequences unfold. The compliance world is smaller than most people realize. Word spreads about companies that value expertise and those that don't. Everstead became a cautionary tale told at industry conferences and professional gatherings. Remember what happened when they fired Emily Davenport? Became shorthand for executive hubris meeting regulatory reality. But I don't tell that story. I let others draw their own lessons while I focus on serving clients who understand that compliance isn't just about checking boxes or managing costs. It's about understanding the intricate web of regulations that allow businesses to operate legally and ethically. It's about respecting the expertise required to navigate that web. It's about recognizing that the quiet professionals in converted closets might be the ones keeping your empire from crumbling. Clear Edge Compliance Consulting doesn't advertise, We don't need to. Our clients find us through word of mouth, through recommendations from people who value competence over charisma. We're not disruptive or innovative or synergistic. We're simply very good at what we do. And in a world full of Carter Whitfields promising to optimize everything, that's become our competitive advantage. Sometimes potential clients ask about our origin story, how ClearEdge came to exist. I tell them the simple truth. I saw an opportunity to build something better. They don't need to know about Conference Room B or the 43 projects that ground to a halt, or the CEO who thought compliance was just expensive paperwork. Those details belong to the past, to a time when I allowed others to determine my value. Now I determine it myself. Every certification I sign, every project I approve, every client I choose to work with reflects my professional standards, not someone else's strategic vision. The freedom is worth more than any salary Everstead could have offered, any title they could have bestowed, any recognition they could have grudgingly provided. Daniel once asked me if I ever regretted not warning Carter about what would happen. It was late on a Friday, after we'd successfully landed a major client who'd specifically sought us out because of our reputation for reliability. We were celebrating with good whiskey in my office, watching the sun set over the city. No, I told him, and it was true. Warning someone implies they're capable of listening. Carter had all the information he needed. He just didn't value it. Still, Daniel pressed, you could have saved a lot of people a lot of pain. The employees who got caught in the crossfire, the clients who suffered delays. He had a point. Innocent people had suffered because of Carter's decision and my response to it. But I'd learned something important during my years in that converted closet. You can't save people from their own willful ignorance. You can only control your own actions, maintain your own standards, and let others face the consequences of theirs. I finished every certification before I left. I reminded him, I maintained every standard until the moment they decided I was redundant. What happened after wasn't my responsibility, it was theirs. Daniel nodded, understanding the distinction. We'd both been discarded by people who didn't understand our value. The difference was in how we'd responded. He'd immediately started building something new. I'd taken a different path, but we'd arrived at the same destination: professional independence and the satisfaction of proving our worth on our own terms. The whiskey was good, the sunset was beautiful, and somewhere across town, Everstead was probably holding another emergency meeting about compliance issues they should have seen coming. But that wasn't my problem anymore. My problems now involved growth strategies and client relationships, and the pleasant challenge of building something sustainable. The best revenge, I'd learned, isn't about destruction, it's about construction. It's about taking the expertise someone dismissed and using it to build something they can never touch. It's about transforming rejection into opportunity, invisibility into independence, redundancy into irreplaceability. Carter Whitfield taught me that, though I doubt he intended to. He showed me what happened when people confused quiet competence with weakness, when they mistook essential for expendable. He gave me the push I needed to stop accepting invisibility and start demanding recognition. Not through words or protests, but through the simple act of withdrawing my contribution and letting the consequences speak for themselves. Every signature I'd placed on those 43 projects carried weight. Not the weight of ego or ambition, but the weight of legal responsibility and professional integrity. When I took those signatures with me, I took that weight too. Everstead discovered, too late, just how heavy that absence could be. But I don't dwell on their discovery. I'm too busy with my own. The discovery that expertise has value beyond any single employer's recognition. That professional worth isn't determined by office size or meeting invitations. That sometimes the best response to being dismissed is to become undeniable. The succulent on my windowsill has started sprouting new growth, small shoots reaching toward the sun it never saw in that converted closet. I watch it sometimes during quiet moments. This small survivor that adapted and thrived once given the right environment. It's a reminder that resilience isn't about enduring poor conditions indefinitely. Sometimes it's about recognizing when to transplant yourself to better soil. My story with Everstead ended the day I signed that separation agreement in Conference Room B. Everything that followed was just epilogue. The natural conclusion of a story whose ending was written the moment they decided compliance was a cost rather than a requirement. I didn't need to watch it unfold. I had my own story to write, my own company to build, my own value to establish in a market that suddenly understood what happened when you took expertise for granted. The last time I drove past Everstead's headquarters, they were removing the company logo from the building. Word was they'd been acquired by a larger firm for a fraction of their former value, absorbed into a conglomerate that understood the importance of regulatory compliance. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing. Just another glass and steel structure housing people who thought efficiency meant cutting costs rather than understanding value. I didn't slow down to look. I had a client meeting to attend, a contract to review, a certification to sign with my name on a company I built from the expertise they'd discarded. The road ahead was clear, the future bright, and somewhere behind me, a former CEO was probably still wondering how everything had gone so wrong so fast. He'd probably never understand that it wasn't fast at all. The collapse had been building from the moment he'd decided some people were redundant. Some expertise was replaceable. Some signatures didn't matter. The only thing fast was the realization. That sudden moment when the weight of absence became undeniable. But by then, I was already gone, building something better from the pieces they'd thrown away. The best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with a professional smile and a signature worth more than they ever imagined. It's built one certification at a time, one client at a time, one success at a time, until the company that dismissed you becomes nothing more than a cautionary tale you don't even need to tell. They thought they were firing an employee. They were actually releasing an entrepreneur. They thought they were cutting costs. They were actually cutting their own foundation. They thought I was redundant. They discovered $12.5 million later that I was irreplaceable. And that's the sweetest revenge of all. Not needing to say, "I told you so," because the silence speaks louder than any words ever could. The absence that echoes, the signature that no longer appears, the expertise that found a better home. My name is Emily Davenport. I used to be invisible. Now I'm undeniable. And all it took was a cardboard box, a separation agreement, and the patience to let gravity do its work.